All right, peeps, today we're going to talk about estimating radicals. That means that sometimes they give you a perfect square. We know that square root of 25 is a perfect square, and the answer to that would be 5. However, sometimes they might give you something like, what's the square root of 13? But 13 is not perfect, so we don't know what that is. Well, how do we find out? Check that out. We got all these steps to help us. So just so you know, you must copy everything you see currently plus everything that we will write on here. Everything that is on the screen is your responsibility in your notes. And I have laid out step by step exactly what we're going to do, and then we're going to do a few examples. So, square root of 13, estimate what it is. Okay, well, step 1 tells me, determine the closest perfect square that comes before the one you're estimating. So if I'm doing 13, I need to find what comes before 13. And I know if I start at 0, the square root of 0 is 0. The square root of 1 is 1, right? If I had 2 here on my number line, I know that the square root of 4 is 2. If I've got 3 on my number line, I know that the square root of 9 is 3. So 9 is going to be my it's going to be my next smallest square root. So the closest perfect square. Okay, so the closest perfect square that is less than the square root of 13 is going to be the square root of 9. So that takes care of step 1. Step 2, determine the closest perfect square that comes after the one that you're estimating. Well, I know that I just did that one, so if I do 4, then the square root of 16 is 4, so that one must come next. So I've got the square root of 16, which is my next perfect square after the square root of 13. Okay, that takes care of step 2. Step 3 says to draw a number line. Well, here's my line right here. I drew it for you already. And place all of the radicals. Okay, so all the radicals that we've been working with. So I've got 13. I'm going to put that right in the middle. That's the one that I was asked to estimate. And then I'm going to put the less than right here, which was square root of 9. And the greater than is going to go on this side, and that was the square root of 16. That takes care of the first part. Then it says determine what the square root of the perfect square is. So this is a perfect square right here, so the square root of 9 is 3. And this is a perfect square here, and the square root of that is 4. This is not a perfect square, but we are going to figure out what it is. It's just going to take us a minute. So it says label the imperfect square as the lowest square root. So that's that, the 3, that's the lowest square root. Okay, with a decimal point, we put our little decimal point there, and a blank spot after the decimal point, like that. And we're going to fill this in, but we need to do some other steps to find out what it is. So anytime you have an imperfect square, the answer is always going to be a decimal. So you can see that it's not too difficult to figure out what is going to be in front of the decimal. It's what comes after the decimal that it takes us a little bit to figure out what that is. But I'm going to show you how right now. So step 5 tells me find the difference between the lowest square root and the middle square root. Well, the lowest square root over here on our number line is the square root of 9. So I need to find the difference between the square root of 9 and the middle, which was 13, and the square root of 13. So finding the difference means I'm going to subtract. So I've got 13 minus 9, and the difference between those two numbers is 4. So that gives me 4. This will be the numerator. So here where it says numerator, I can put that in. That's 4. Step 6 says find the difference between the lowest square root and the highest square root. Well, again, our lowest square root over here on our number line was 9. square root of 9, and our highest was the square root of 16. Okay, so I need to find the difference between those two. So 16 minus 9 equals 7. Okay, I had to find the difference between those numbers. This number will be the denominator. So this number right here is going to be our denominator. Okay? Step 7 says divide the numerator by the denominator. Divide the numerator, which is 4, by the denominator, which is 7. Well, 7 doesn't go into 4, so that's going to be a 0. Put my decimal point, and I add my 0. 7 goes into 45 times, and that's 35. I have 5 left over. Going to add a 0 there. 7 goes into 50 7 times, so minus 49 gives me a 1, and I'm going to go one more step here and add that 0, and 7 goes into 10 one time. If I round my answer to the nearest hundredth, that's that place right there, I'm looking at that to round, then I'm going to get 0.57. That will be what goes after the decimal in step 4. So when I was over here and I had my blank spot right here, this right here is what goes in that spot. So I put a 57 there. So the answer to, let's get rid of that little mark that we accidentally made. So the answer to the square root of 13 is going to be 3.57. Now, it's okay if you're like, well, this is a lot, because we're going to do a couple more, and of course we'll do more in class. So let's go ahead and look at what our next one's going to be. And this one asks me to estimate the square root of 21. Okay, so here we're asked to estimate the square root of 21. So I know that if I look back to my previous notes, that step 1 told me to determine the closest perfect square that comes before. So I'm thinking 21, well, I know 25 is a perfect square, and that's pretty close to 21, but that comes after. So what comes before? Let's see, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16. 16 is a perfect square. So the first one was to find a perfect square that comes before what I'm being asked to estimate. And that was the square root of 16. Step 2 tells me to find a perfect square that comes after what I'm being asked to estimate. And I already found that when I said, oh, I know that the square root of 25 is a perfect square, and that was close. So there is my before, and there is my after. Okay? At least I'll try before here. Okay, step 3, if we go back and look, step 3 tells me to take care of my number line. That was this part right there. So step 3 is to make a number line. So I can go ahead and make my number line. And I know I'm putting the one I'm estimating in the middle. And I put the one that comes before on the left. And I put the one that comes after on the right. And that I need to decide what the square roots of these are. So I know the square root of 16 is 4. I know the square root of 25 is 5. So I know that 21, square root of 21, is going to come in between 4 and 5 on the number line, and that it's going to be a decimal because all imperfect squares are decimal. All imperfect squares are decimals. You must remember that. It'll help you remember how to do this. So I know that it's going to be 4 point something. So I'm going to put 4 point something, which was step 4, to create the decimal for my answer. That's this right here. That's step 4. Okay? Step 5 says that I should find the difference between the first square root, that's the lower one, and the second square root, that's the middle one. So I had 16 and 21. And that is going to be my numerator, right? So 21 minus 16 gives me 5. So 5 is going to be my numerator. And then step 2 tells me to find the difference between the first one, between the first square root and the third square root. That means I'm looking for the lowest one, which is 16, and the highest one, which is 25. So I'm going to do 25 minus 16 to find the difference between the two. And I am going to get 9. So I have 9, and that is going to be my denominator, right? So that was my numerator. This is my denominator. Okay, and I'm always working with this one, always working with that one. And that step 7 was to divide those two to come up with a decimal, to find a decimal, to add to step 4, which is this part right here. So if I take 5 and I divide it by 9, 9 does not go into 5, so I put a 0 there. I add my little decimal point and put my 0 there. 9 goes into 50 5 times, which is 45, and I get a 5 left over. Add my 0, and 9 goes into 50 5 times, and this is going to be a repeating decimal. So I've got 0.555, and I have to round to this place right here, which gives me an answer of 0.56. And I know that that right there goes right here, so I have 5, 6. So the answer to the square root of 21 is 4.56. Okay? Let's try another one. I'm going to let you fill in the steps here on your own. I will be checking to make sure that you filled in these steps. So I'm going to do the work for you, and you're going to fill in the steps. So the first thing I need to do is figure out what comes before and what comes after. So I've got my square root of 15. Well, what comes before? Square root of 9 comes close, right? And what comes after? Well, I know square root of 16. That comes right after. And if I were to make that my number line, I know that that answer is 3. I do not know what that is yet. I know that that's 4. So I know that square root of 15 is going to fall on the number line somewhere between 3 and 4 here. So my answer is going to be 3 point something, but I don't know what yet. So then I need to find the difference between the lowest square root and the middle square root. That's the first and second ones there. So I take 15, I subtract 9, and I get 6, and that is my numerator. And then I have to find the difference between the first one and the third one. That's the lowest and the highest, and that's going to be my denominator. So I have 16 minus 9, which is 7. Okay, and then I take this and I divide it. So I have 6 divided by 7. 7 does not go into 6, so I put a 0, give myself a decimal point, add another 0. 7 goes into 60 8 times, that's 56, and I have 4 left over, add a 0. 7 goes into 40 5 times, that's 35, and I have 5 left over. I can add another 0. And 7 goes into 57 times. That's 49. And that's as far as I need to go. So I need to round to this place right here, the 100th place. So I'm looking at this number, so that is going to be 0.86. And I know that this fills in right here for my answer. So I know that the square root of 15 is 3.86. Okay? Again, I'm looking for you to have filled in those steps. And I have one more to do with you. And again, you are going to fill in these steps. And I'm going to look to make sure that you have those filled in, so make sure you take care of that. And first, I need to figure out what comes before the square root of 89 and what comes after the square root of 89. Well, I know that 81 is a perfect square and that the square root of 81 is 9, and that's pretty close, right? I also know that 100 is a square root and that the square root of 100 is 10, and that is pretty close. And I know that I need to find the square root of 89, which falls between 9 and 10. So my answer is going to be 9 point something, and I just have to figure out what that is. And to figure out what that is, I'm going to take my first square root and find the difference between that and my second square root, and that is going to be my numerator. So I have 81 and 89. I'm going to subtract them. I have 8. So that's going to be my numerator. And then I have 81 and 100, and I need to subtract those. That's my first and my third, my lowest and my highest. I need to find the difference between those. And the difference between those is going to be 19. So I'm going to put 19 as my denominator, and then I can divide them. So I have 8 divided by 19. 19 does not go into 8, but it does go into 80, and I added my little decimal point. 19 goes into 80, let's say about 4 times. So 9 times 4 is 36. Carry the 3, that's 4, that's 7, that's 76. And that leaves me with 4, and I can add a 0 there. And then I have 40, and 19 goes into 40, let's say about 2 times. And that would be, carry the 1, so that's going to be 38. And that leaves me with 2. And then I can do one more place. And 19 goes into 21 times, leaving me with 1. And I need to round to that spot right there, so I'm looking at this number. So my answer here is going to be 0.42. And I know that this number right here goes into my answer up there, so it's going to be 9.42. So my answer to the square root of 89 is 9.42. Okay, of course you understand that I expect you to come in with all of your notes completed, including these steps here that I did not fill in, but you are going to fill in because you have them already twice from me. And tomorrow we're going to do several more of these problems. So if you're still a little confused, that's okay, but at least I know that you watched the video. And I know that you can go back and rewatch this video however many times you need to at home, even after we go over it. Have a great evening.